When it comes to drawing heads, not only are all head shapes different, but understanding how to represent them in different perspectives can be quite difficult. Now, one can simply try to draw a head from memory or from what they see, but perhaps the most useful method of drawing a head is utilizing the grid lines of the Loomis method. Now, the Loomis method helps you to break up the head into its basic shapes for a more accurate placement, but it also helps you understand different head shapes as well as heads from different perspectives. So with that being said, hey guys, my name is Matt. Welcome to another video by artincontext.org, where we explore various art related topics, and in today's tutorial we will be looking at how to utilize the Loomis method to understand different head shapes from various perspectives, and then ultimately to apply that to a profile drawing of a female head structure. So with that being said, let's get into it. Now, we first want to understand what exactly the Loomis method is in its most simplified form. So we're going to do this by lightly sketching different profiles in different perspectives, and by doing so we will see how to apply the concepts of the Loomis drawing method to create different head shapes. And once we have done that, we can apply it to an actual drawing of a figure, in this case a female figure. Now we're going to first start breaking down how to work with the rule of thirds. So the intention is to always start with a circle, which is going to make up most of the head shape. Once we have a circle drawn out, we then play around with a placement of a smaller oval-like shape within that first circle, and this is going to orient the head. Now we then can utilize that small circle to establish the side of the head, which will break the head up into three main sections. Now, utilizing a rule of thirds to establish the hairline, eyes and nose are the three main guidelines of the Loomis method. Once we have the three main lines that establish the main facial features, we create a central line running through the face down towards the chin, and this is basically establishing the actual center line that runs through the face that breaks it up in its more symmetrical quality. The chin will then flow into the smaller circle along the side of the profile, connecting to what will then become the ear within the head shape. This is the basic guide of what will be used to determine various head shapes and profile poses. So once you understand these guidelines, you can then utilize them to become a little bit more specific for various poses, perspectives and different angles at which you'd like to draw your head. So now that we understand the basics, let's explore some different poses. Now, once again, you can start with a basic circle. In this case, from there we can consider where we'd like to place that smaller circle. Remember to utilize the smaller circle as a way of establishing the spacing for the three guidelines that define the hairline, eyes and nose. Again, that smaller circle kind of runs along the same axis that the hairline, the eyes and the nose will be established within the larger circle. The smaller circle should also be divided into four even segments along the surface area that defines the position from which the head is seen. And basically, once we have those lines established in the smaller circle, they should flow into the larger circle to establish the eye line. Now, the intention is to experiment with different perspectives for various profile angles, and naturally the facial position will change due to the placement of these circles and guidelines. When creating the Loomis head or utilizing the Loomis head to create a drawing from scratch, it is a good suggestion to allow the guidelines to navigate how the head is angled. By this, what is meant is that the face will naturally form simply by the placement of these lines and various guidelines. So the idea is to just allow the lines to basically form the head itself, rather than trying to form the head in your mind and then place the guidelines thinking that you know where the position of various features are. So you do want to trust those features. The intention is also to be creative with these facial shapes, so thinking about how the guidelines can be used to create more feminine or masculine shapes within the face. And this is where we start to maybe change the shape of the chin as it flows into the ear, or to give the nose a little bit more of a stronger structure. But ultimately, for now, we just want to keep these sketches quite basic. As you slowly build up the essential guidelines, you can start to work with line work to create a unique head shape. So the guidelines are to be used to assist you in forming heads, but you may shape the head in various ways to suit a particular style. Again, this is where we can consider making more masculine or feminine head shapes. But as you continue, try to pose heads in different ways from the last drawn head. Now, naturally, the Loomis method is a set of shapes and guidelines that are utilized to create a head structure from, but you can also consider looking at some reference images and kind of sketching these guidelines over some reference images to assist you in understanding already established head structures, maybe of celebrities or other reference images on the internet. Now, as you get more used to it and represent heads in different perspectives, in different sizes for different types of characters, the rules will become much more seamless as you get used to them, and naturally you will find that the formation of head shapes becomes a lot more simple. However, the creative intervention is something that we want to bear in mind, and we are kind of working from this foundational establishment of shapes and guidelines to create our own idea of what we'd like a head shape to be, or the perspective from which we are drawing the head. Now, the intention is to practice with the concepts of the Loomis method in mind, and as you do so, to get more comfortable with these unique guidelines. The side view is a very unique one though, so the side view is another unique way to utilize the Loomis method, but the guidelines do remain the same. However, you want to think about the smaller circle as being inside the larger circle, because it is seen from a side view. So naturally, when we draw these smaller circles in unique perspectives, we can see how they shift towards the side of the circular structure and distort into a more oval-like structure. But if we are looking at a character from the side view, naturally we would see that smaller circle kind of perfectly aligned within the larger circle. So we will naturally find that the jaw then can flow into the points where the ear and the neck meet, and the rules will always remain the same thereafter. They simply just shift due to the orientation of the head. And lastly, remember that it is about getting used to the rules and experimentation. So once comfortable, you can then utilize these rules to create a unique contour and shape within the face, but ultimately get comfortable with sketching out different head shapes in various perspectives. And once we have done that, we can move on to using the Loomis method to draw a realistic face. Now, once you are more comfortable with the concepts of the Loomis method, you can then apply these concepts to a realistic head drawing where you work with shapes to define shadows within the face. Now, let us take a look at the Loomis method step by step with a more realistic drawing. So this is where we can kind of go through a step-by-step process, and we can start by establishing the guidelines once again of the Loomis method. Now, in this case, we will be drawing a female structure, so we can start by establishing the guidelines of the Loomis method. In this case, let us draw a face from the front view, and this is just going to make it a little easier for us to understand how to represent facial features. So we can start by establishing the basic circle divided into 4 equal parts with perpendicular lines. From here, we can proceed to add in the circular structure to establish the position of the ears, and then as well as an extending line to define the length of the jaw. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to lightly sketch out the features. So once we have the general position of the guidelines, we can proceed to lightly sketch out the features of the face, and this is where we work on the positioning of various facial features. The intention here is to be a little loose with the placements and shapes of various features. So this is also depending on whether you are drawing from life or you are kind of just trying to create a character in your head. Already we do want to be intentional about the actual feminine nature of these various features. So the idea now is to basically refine the features. So once we have established the shape and position of various features, we can then erase the light sketch and start refining each of the facial features. Now, this is where we can make their shape and structure a little bit more specific, maybe making the nose slightly more petite, the eyes larger, the lips more voluptuous, depending on the actual aesthetic qualities we'd like to be represented in the facial features of our character design. Now, naturally, as we continue, we can then slowly start to build up shading and details. So once we have the general shape of the various facial features, we can then refine the features with some detailed line work and shading. Now, the Loomis method once again helps to establish the shape of the face and how its three-dimensional qualities will develop various shadow formations, but this is where we kind of have our own creative intervention in terms of how to represent these features as realistic as possible. So this is where the features such as the nose, eyes, and mouth start to have unique shadow formations around them, and this is where we can consider maybe working with a reference image to assist us in a more detailed approach from this point onward. Now, take your time when working through the different features with the face, making sure you spend a good portion of time refining them, and as you work through the different facial features, you should find that the Loomis method kind of should be imprinted in the back of your mind as you slowly start to establish their positions of these various features and the shading and shadowing around these various features in a proportionally correct way. Now, again, the Loomis method helps to establish the actual structure of the face and where the position of these various features are, but it is up to you to kind of take your time now with the creative intervention of integrating shading, establishing the actual three-dimensional qualities of how shadows contour around the face, depending on the bone structure. So with that being said, we are trying to make features more three-dimensional, and this is now up to your creative decision. So by this, what is meant is that you can make the eyebrows thicker or thinner, you can enlarge the eyes if you choose to do so, and so on. So allow yourself to work through the entire facial structure, thinking about the protruding qualities of various features and trying to keep the idea of these Loomis Method guidelines and structures to kind of assist you in how you contour the shadows around the facial features to represent bone structure and so on. Now naturally, once you have set up the actual guidelines and worked your way through to the features and start integrating shading, allow yourself to work through the entire facial structure, thinking about the protruding qualities of the various features, including bone structure along the jaw. And think about how the Loomis Method guidelines basically establish those contouring lines to define the actual bone structures and how they connect to one another. But as we continue towards the end of this sketch, we can then further the drawing quality by integrating some highlights along various protruding features to really emphasize how they are exposed to the light source. Lastly, the hairstyle will be a major contextualizing feature that is once again subject to your character design, or if you are using the Loomis Method to assist you in your drawing of a already existing profile. But otherwise, take your time with the representation of these features and making sure that you establish the guidelines to have a proportionally correct placement of these various features. Now we will break down the process once more with a different type of angle within a head structure. This way we will kind of understand how to utilize these rules of the Loomis Method once again in another profile drawing, and in this case we can kind of build up this drawing with more color details to really understand how to represent three-dimensional qualities through the integration of a coloring process. Now we start once again by establishing the guidelines of the Loomis Method. So we start the same way as before by establishing the guidelines, helping us to shape and place the different features accurately. In this case we are kind of drawing the head in a more unique angle, so you can explore drawing the head from various angles, finding one that seems a little bit more challenging to you. So a good suggestion is to maybe now consider working with a reference image of a head or profile that is at a unique angle. You can explore the internet, maybe go into Pinterest, and what we want to do is really just want to utilize the Loomis Method guidelines to kind of place various features of the face in a proportionally correct way, making sure that the features kind of form along the actual guidelines of the Loomis Method, and then from there we can slowly start to erase and then refine the actual head of the drawing. So this is where we can start to basically sketch the head. So once we have worked out the different facial features, we can then proceed by refining the features, giving them their more unique attributes. The intention is to always spend time on shaping the face with the assistance of the Loomis guidelines. So take your time lightly sketching the features, making sure that you work through the entire facial structure. As you work your way through all the features, you can then lightly erase them once again before refining them further. So again, we proceed by going through all the features and slowly refining each of them. And this is where we can go over the lightly erased drawing details with maybe a darker medium, slowly bringing a slightly more refined shape to the different features in the face. As you slowly work through the entire drawing, you should start to see how it takes on a little bit more of a realistic shape with the use of the Loomis Method guidelines. Now, it is important to remember that using the Loomis Method head method is to basically help you establish features in the early stages of the drawing process. The rest of the drawing should take time and careful consideration as you work through the different features, and this is completely up to you, but we can then start to move on to integrating some colors. So naturally at this point your guidelines should be gone. However, we want to make a mental note of how they form the contours of the face. So this is where basically the shapes can then be used with color to establish tonal values between shadows and highlights. Now this is where we think of the concepts we use for the monochromatic drawing and apply them to a version where we utilize color instead of a monochromatic medium. So by doing so we can play around with darker colors in highly shadowed areas and lighter colors for highlighted areas. Now naturally color choice is subjective, however thinking about the three-dimensional qualities of the face can assist you in the choices of your color palette. We don't necessarily need to worry too much about making a realistic color palette in terms of skin, but we can play around with various colors to kind of figure out how to utilize a spectrum of maybe a single color or maybe two colors or three colors to represent highlights and shadows. Now the intention should always be to think about how the face is a three-dimensional structure and therefore has moments of protrusion which inevitably cause shadow formations along the face. Now naturally this three-dimensional quality is a little bit more obvious in the facial structure because there are significantly protruding qualities such as the nose or the indentations around the eyes, but we also want to think about how we can apply these concepts to structures that are three-dimensional and maybe a little less obvious, and in this case this is the hair structure. Now the hair naturally is a group of these single hair strands that kind of clump together, but they do have volume, they do have dimension, and what we want to do is we want to build up both shadows and highlights in the structure as it sits on the head. We also want to make sure that it is basically hovering slightly above the head, and this kind of suggests volume because when hairs grow, they grow outward from the skull, so naturally we don't necessarily want to draw in the hair structure flat on the head, but we want it to be slightly hovering and then slowly utilize that kind of concept when we form the hair around the entire head structure. But otherwise at this point it's simply a matter of taking your time, working through the various features and really considering how to kind of work with shadows and highlights, but not necessarily in a monochromatic fashion, but using a spectrum of maybe 1 to 3 colors to really emphasize these different colored features. But remember, the most important thing is to really always consider the qualities of the Loomis guidelines and how this forms the three-dimensional qualities of the features, and naturally how that will then place them accurately along the surface area of the face, but how it will also establish the contours of shadows and highlights. And then you have it guys, the Loomis method, step by step, going through a few different ideas of how to incorporate this or how to understand it through some simple sketches, and then how to incorporate it into a more realistic approach of a profile. Again, the Loomis method is something to be practiced, so make sure you do take your time practicing this particular method of drawing a head, and then kind of experiment with how you can create your own unique profiles or head drawings. Otherwise guys, thanks again for tuning in. That is it from me today. If you did like this video, please let us know in the comment section below if you're interested in similar or related topics, and you can drop a like and a subscribe. This helps us to grow the channel, which ultimately just helps us to basically make more content and share that with you guys. But otherwise, thanks again for tuning in. That is it from me today. Until next time, cheers.